I'm Jono Buchanan. In this video, what we're going to do is to take our drum machine designer kit that we designed in the last episode on another stage. Now, in that video, what I did was to build the beginnings of a drum machine designer kit completely from scratch. We added a kick drum, a snare, and various other sounds, and we discovered that you can make those sounds play back through the quick sampler, through drum synth, and we discovered right at the end that it's possible to actually resample a sound directly within Drum Machine Designer. What we did was to take an electronic drum sound, we set up a bit crusher on it, and we resampled it directly so that a new pad was created with that resampled sound. And if I open Drum Machine Designer, I have a chance to see exactly that. So here are the sounds that we added. I use this sound called Membrane, which is here, and we resampled it so that effectively it became a sample in its own right. And here is the resampled version of it here. Now, what I want to do within this video is to take this resampled sound on a little bit more. But before we do that, we're going to discover a couple of extra things that we can do to any sound within a Drum Machine Designer instrument. Specifically, what I want to do is to look at one particular thing within the classic playback mode. Now, we saw in the previous video that there are sort of two main ways of playing back a drum sample like this. There's either one shot, which means it doesn't matter how long I hold the note down for, the entire sample will play, or there's classic mode. And if I select classic mode, when I play a sound, if I play it very briefly, we'll only hear the beginning of the sample. And what I need to do is to hold the sound down the whole way through if I want to hear the whole drum sound. Now, normally with drum instruments, we do want that. We want to hear the whole of a sound. We don't want to have to program a note that's long enough to play the entire sample back. But in classic mode, I've got access to looping. The idea that what I can do is to have a sound loop. And now when I hold the sound down, we can see through the whole of this yellow looping section with our loop start and end points that what we've got now is a sound which is just going to play round and round and round. Now, one thing that I'm really drawn to, the idea that I've got in mind for this resampled membrane sound, is almost to see whether or not I can use this sound as a sort of start point for a whole new track in its own right. And in particular, what I've got in mind is the idea that varying the loop position might be quite interesting. At the moment, we've got a very long loop. It's taking a while for the sound to play back. But if I vary it, what we might be in a position to do would be create quite an interesting new sound. Now, what I want to do is to somehow find a way to adjust this loop endpoint. And I can't do that directly within here. I can't use that as an automated parameter. It'd be useful if I could, but I can't. What I need to do instead is to come into the full version of the sampler instrument, so I've got access to finding a way to make that kind of an effect so that it's happening all the time without me having to simply move that backwards and forwards. So what I need to do is to swap this kit piece out for the full version of Logic Sampler. Now, just to remind you, if I come down to this resample membrane sound, which is the sound we're listening to, it's currently using the quick sampler. And what I want to do is to swap it for the main sampler, this multi-sampler version instead. Now, normally, if you swapped an instrument within Logic, that would be a disaster for the previous sound. If I swapped the ES1 for the ES2, I'd lose all of those settings. But what actually happens when I swap the quick sampler in for the sampler, the main version of the sampler, is that I retain that sound. Obviously, I can play it across a wider collection of sounds, but it's the same sound and it's kept the same loop point. The crucial thing, however, is that the Drum Machine Designer instrument isn't set up to show me all of the parameters that are available within the sampler. In order to make the adjustments that I want to make, I'm going to need to open the sampler interface instead, so that now I'm effectively using this instrument as one of my sounds, but I can no longer configure it within Drum Machine Designer itself. So what I'm interested to try and do is to see if I can find a parameter which is going to allow me to adjust that loop length so that that sort of strumming kind of sound with the loop changing in length is something that I can actually make part of the sound. Now, there are 5 main pages within the sampler, and all of these are available to view modularly, if you like. I think I might have just made that word up, but that's okay, we'll go with it. So effectively, I've got these different modules, and I can switch them on and off. So if I just want to see the main sort of synth parameters, the main core bits of the sound, I can. And if I wanted to start configuring other parts, I can do that too. Now, I'm going to need a number of different pages to carry out the sort of thing that I want to be able to do. And in particular, I definitely want to be able to see the zone, which is the sample itself, which is playing and which we're already seeing has got its loop point. So here it is. And again, within the main sampler, we're able to see it as we were within the quick sampler. But what I want to do is to create a modulation routing, which is going to allow me to adjust that endpoint. And in particular, what I want to do is to see whether or not I can find that firstly as a target. So a target is literally the thing that you want to modulate. And what I'm interested in doing is finding the loop endpoint. I want to make that the thing that I'm targeting. Now, because I want movement that's basically sweeping backwards and forwards, the obvious thing to do is to use an LFO as the source. So by selecting the LFO, and I'm using LFO1, what I've got a chance to do is to say, okay, I want LFO1 to adjust the loop endpoint. How much do I want that to happen? Well, a lot. I want to be able to hear that really sort of clearly. So I'm going to turn up plenty of amount, if you like. And what we should be able to see when I then scroll down is we can see the LFO that I've set up, and we can obviously see our sample as well. So here's the LFO. What I then want to do is to make sure that I'm sort of clocking this to tempo. I'm going to set a rate of, well, we'll start with an 8th note and see what that sounds like. I think that's going to be a bit quick, but we'll see. And what I can also do is to choose its shape. And to start with, I'll go with this kind of triangle wave shape that we've got at the moment. So when I play a note, sure enough, it's pretty fast. What I want to do is just be in a position to slow this down. So what I'm going to do is to set a rate which is going to be much slower. So let's select maybe, I don't know, well, we'll see. I'm going to start with a minim or a half note. Now at the moment, the loop is coming all the way back to the beginning of the sample. Now, when I was auditioning this, I never quite got that close to the very beginning of the sound. So what I'm going to do is to adjust the loop start point so it's a bit further into the waveform. And what I'm also going to do is to adjust the end point of the sample as well. Okay, I really like this. We're beginning to get that movement that we had when we were beginning to audition it. We can see how that automation is happening. Now, I've got a little bit of clicking going on every time the sample gets back towards the beginning. What I'm going to try and do is to see whether or not I can introduce a little bit of crossfade, just so effectively we're just getting rid of that. That's working really nicely. Now, one thing that's interesting is that obviously at the moment we've got a rate that's kind of vaguely clocked to tempo, but because this sound is kind of doing some interesting kind of crazy things in terms of this loop, it's not really easy to hear exactly how that might sync to tempo. Now, obviously bearing in mind what I've got here is a sound that's being triggered back within Drum Machine Designer, what I could do would be to see what it sounds like against a kick drum. What I'm going to do is just record a little bit of this sound. Okay, so we've got 4 bars of it, but because I've chosen this rate of 3/4, we've got this kind of 3-beat feel, which actually I really like. I'm going to quantize it so that the playback of that note starts right at the beginning. And then what I'm going to do is just to simply program a really simple kick drum pattern, which I'm going to do here. Just 1 bar will do. What I'm going to do is to quantize those notes as well. And I'm also going to fix the dynamics so that all of the velocities are exactly the same. And I'm going to create a little offset so that they're all quite loud. And then what I'm going to do is to repeat this. And what we've got now is a kick drum playing against this resampled sound where an LFO is adjusting the loop length. What I like about a sound like this, it reminds me of kind of the sorts of things that John Hopkins does. Some really interesting, quite organic sounds that have got this kind of slightly stammery, stuttery thing where something unpredictable and sort of slightly arrhythmic is happening against a really fixed sort of kick drum pattern. It's a really interesting, quite inspirational place to start a track. So within this video, we've done actually quite a lot of things. We've taken our resampled sound and we've swapped it out so it's not playing back on the quick sampler anymore. We've got all of the benefits of the full sampler instrument. What that allows us to do is to create an LFO assignment to the loop length, so that effectively what's happening is that the loop is constantly changing, undulating if you like, based on the shape that we've chosen for the waveform. And what we've then done is to put that new undulating sound up against a drum part just to see whether or not we can find an interesting place to start a track. And of course, this is just the start point. I haven't thought about additional effects on this. I haven't thought about other assignments I could make from a modulation point of view within the sampler, but immediately just on two sounds, I've got something completely of my own.